The Summer I Turned Pretty returned this week with the penultimate episode of the season, and after the worst rated episode that the show has ever put out there last week, I think it's safe to say that this one had everything that it needed to improve upon what we got. With there being a slight time jump, 3 months to be specific, this one saw it go from Thanksgiving all the way into the new year and now approaching the summer, where we saw that Belly was trying to move on and had established a bit of a life for herself in Paris. However, back in the States, the brothers were still not talking and Belly was at the forefront of their minds. With an ending that showed that relationships had been repaired, and Conrad, well, he was going to be making the biggest move that he'd ever made in order to show just how much he'd been thinking about her. Let's dive into this week's episode and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is The Summer I Turned Pretty Season 3, Episode 10, Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Conrad's journey in this episode was probably one of my favourites. There was a song that played in the background when he was writing a letter to Belly, which pretty much summed up his entire mindset and mood. The song was Shouldn't I Give Up? But as we saw, giving up was the last thing that he wanted to do, and he actually ended up doing the complete opposite. Conrad was still essentially mourning the absence of Belly, and the fact that he hadn't heard from her since the day of the wedding, where he said that destroying his entire family was worth it because at least she knew how he truly felt. And then, with that, he'd gone back to California, was working on building his career, and had been trying to distract himself. However, he still hadn't spoken to Jeremiah. There'd been several holidays such as Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's Eve where they'd avoided each other, and despite Conrad reaching out, Jeremiah wasn't prepared to return the text. It was only on the anniversary of their mother's death, where they both by chance happened to be at the grave of Susanna, where they finally addressed things. I actually found it quite poetic that the both of them made a promise to their mother before she died that they wouldn't let anything get between them, and that Conrad would always look out for Jeremiah. And just by chance, it was at the site of her grave where they saw each other for the first time and were able to make amends. Conrad wanted to be there for Jeremiah and wanted his forgiveness, even if it took time for him to fully heal, and Jeremiah was now willing to give him that. Conrad had been writing to Belly throughout her time in Paris and sending her care packages with letters and items to remind her of home, as even though he didn't know it, she was homesick. So in true Conrad fashion, he was able to save the day even though he was blissfully unaware of it. One of the items that he sent her was the infinity necklace, which was definitely a message to her that he still wanted to be with her. Jeremiah gave Conrad his approval to go after Belly and to not let it go to waste because he recognized that he was never able to compete with what his brother and Belly had. So with Conrad being taken to a conference in Brussels, which is a stone's throw away from Paris, he changed his flights to land in Paris. And with him receiving one postcard from Belly, which he kept in his wallet, which showed that he truly cared about her and wanted to be close with her. With her new address being on it, it seemed like he was going to be visiting her and surprising her whilst she was out there. I predicted a couple of episodes back that it felt like Conrad was going to end up in Paris, and do you know what? I love the idea of it. Conrad and Belly have always felt like the end game, and I'm hoping that it's going to go in the direction that Conrad wants it to go in. Unlike the song, he hasn't given up, and he just might get that happy ending that he wanted with her. Like Laurel said to him at the start, if you want to know if she wants to speak with you, you're gonna have to find out yourself, and that's exactly what he's doing. Belly had been in Paris for 3 months when we first saw her, and she was struggling with her day-to-day. She didn't like her work, she was living with terrible roommates, and she was homesick, fearing that she was still holding on to what was back at home, what people thought of her, and still being too afraid to re-enter that part of her life. So she was trying to forge a new one in another continent, but the missing of holidays was something that was at the front of her mind. Over the course of this episode, we saw that she grew closer with Benito, somebody that I don't actually feel she's that well suited to. But as the episode went on, and especially on New Year's Eve, with Conrad reaching out to her and Jeremiah also phoning her as well and saying that he wanted to move on and was happy that she was doing well, it was the end of a chapter for her. So she instead took it upon herself to kiss Benito, and from there, a new love story was formed. Belly was able to move on from the past like Jeremiah had and was no longer worried about being away from family, even moving into Max's old apartment. One thing that also showed that she was a degree separated from everything was that she forgot that it was the anniversary of Susanna's death, which not only hurt her a bit, but it made her realize that maybe she'd neglected home a little bit. With her moving into the apartment, this was where she finally responded to Conrad, telling him her new address, which felt like it was always setting him up to arrive there. In the closing moments of the episode, we saw that she was sitting down at the hair salon and was about to get a new haircut, something that I'm imagining is drastic, as she said that she was ready for something different this summer. I think her physical appearance is going to be different, and I feel like it's going to be symbolic of her mindset being slightly different too, in wanting to stay out in Paris and not return to the States. I wonder if when Conrad arrives, she's still going to want to stay in Paris, and it's not going to be the happy ending like many of us are predicting. Could she choose herself? Imagine if she does. Whilst it is probably the better decision for her to make, I would be a little underwhelmed with it because I think her and Conrad are well suited. Benito is part of her moving on from Jeremiah process. He isn't her person, so I'm intrigued to see what's going to happen with Billy. Jeremiah. The line that summed up Jeremiah's journey in this episode was the phone call that he finally had with Billy. Their call ended with them saying, "I should probably let you go," and him responding and saying, "I should probably let you go too." Whilst this was about the call, it had a deeper meaning of their entire relationship and finally being able to move on. Jeremiah was struggling in this episode, and this was probably the most I'd felt sorry for him because he was now on his own. The likes of Stephen had forgiven Conrad, and Jeremiah felt ostracized in his own family, not even attending Christmas because Conrad was there. However, Denise was actually the very person that helped Jeremiah get through his troubles by simply saying that he should forgive them. Not because they deserve it, but because the weight of emotion is what holds so much power over him. And we saw that advice actually being taken because he made the move and called Billy, and he and Conrad spoke at the grave and were able to move on. Jeremiah had a good connection with Denise, and whilst it could be setting up a romance, with there only being one episode left, I don't think the show would start something that it wouldn't be able to finish in a timely manner. Jeremiah showed that he was prepared to move on from Billy with the fact that he gave Conrad the advice to go and see her, and also the fact that he was even working a job after being cut off from his father, highlighting that the sense of maturity that he was lacking was now starting to become part of his personality. I also like the fact that Conrad addressed that Jeremiah only proposed to Billy because he wanted her to be his and to make up for the fact that he cheated on her. Conrad said, "You can't take someone, she's not an object," and it was probably one of the most applicable lines in the entirety of the season. I do wonder what's next for Jeremiah, but I think him maturing and growing whilst on his own is probably the most important thing that he needs to do. He's got his brother back, and I think that'll be something that will help him navigate his healing journey. Taylor and Stephen. Taylor and Stephen's story wasn't actually that important in this episode, but what it showed us was that they were each other's endgame, and I think it actually highlighted a level of maturity in their relationship when compared to Jeremiah and Billy. Taylor and Stephen were planning on moving in together once they graduated, and when Taylor told Stephen that she was going to be visiting Paris, the first thing that he said was, "You've got to go." When you compare that to Billy and Jeremiah, Jeremiah didn't want her to go, so for me, that showed that they were all good. Stephen actually quit his job in this episode because Adam found out about him trying to get funding for his company that him and Denise set up, and with Adam not being mad and feeling like it was Denise that was the one who took the risk, Stephen quit and showed that he had the guts to do it, to go full throttle with his business and to try his best to make it work, showing that he was going to be passionate about the job that he did. My review of the episode. I thought this was a much better episode than last week. It felt like it was more consequential. It was interesting seeing Billy's time in Paris, and I'm glad we got to see the repairing of the relationships. However, I do feel like Conrad and Jeremiah's conversation felt a bit rushed, and it's repaired quite quickly considering everything that happened. This was actually quite an emotional episode. I thought Jeremiah being upset and feeling distant from his family was something that really resonated and cut through the screen, and Conrad's love that he had for Billy was something that I also thought was quite infectious, and I got joy in watching him admitting how he truly felt. Billy's journey in Paris was something that was also pretty interesting to follow. It's been interesting seeing her find herself and making her new friends, but it doesn't feel like the Billy that we know, nor the Billy that even she relates to. I think that scene when she was younger talking to Susanna about how she never really wanted to travel was telling of that, and it was showing us that she'd be returning back to the States sooner than even she thinks. The songs in this episode were really well chosen. The titles, the lyrics, and the way that they felt all connected to the overall mood, and I thought they complemented the scenes really well. Honestly, I can't believe we're only one episode away from the finale. It's been a long season, and one that's been filled with drama. Personally, I can't wait to see how it's going to unfold because it's been so eventful. I'm hoping that Conrad and Billy end up together, but we're just going to have to wait and see. What do you reckon? So, there you have it, the Summer I Turned Pretty Season 3, Episode 10, Ending Explained.